Hello, welcome to the Activate Doors podcast. I'm John Davidson. This time I'm speaking to a man who has turned his passion for the hills into an inspirational book. Running Adventures Scotland is by Ross Brannigan. It was published just last week and it rounds up 25 routes across Scotland, many of them up here in the Highlands. And it's a really inspirational book. It's got loads of great photography, great images, lots of information, suggestions, alternatives for everything from kind of easy, low-level trail runs to big mountain days and multi-day adventures. So I began by asking Ross to tell us a little bit about himself.
So, I'm originally from Tillicoultry in Clackmannanshire at the foot of the Ochil Hills. So grew up exploring the Ochils and rambling around them for, done so for, best part probably 20 years, I think. Still probably my favourite hills. And at the age of 9, I did my first Munro in the Cairngorms, and then since then it's basically been a growing love affair with Scotland's mountains, and every holiday spent exploring different parts of the country, climbing Munros, just getting a chance to discover new places it's the best way to explore the country is through walking and cycling and running. So, after a couple of years, but once I sort of was in my teens, I was introduced to running, and gradually my, love for being up in the mountains and exploring them, combined with my newfound love for running. And started hill running and exploring places by, running either big long days or multi-day fast packing trips, which is a really nice way to, sort of immerse yourself in the landscape, I find. Lived in Tillicoultry until a few years back, and then I briefly lived in Pitlochry for work. Working for an environmental charity, and recently moved to the Lake District for personal reasons. Found my now fiance, now she's kind of based down there. Her work's based down there, and I now work permanently from home.
There's worse places to be if you have to move to England, aren't there?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I didn't choose it necessarily, but I guess I love living in the Lake District. It's it is an amazing place for people who are outdoorsy and love, like me, cycling and running, and walking as well. But it's not too far away that I can nip across the border, sort of within good time.
That's it, yeah. I know my kind of childhood holidays were spent going to the Lake District from kind of around Lancashire way, where I'm from. And I've just kind of gradually moved further and further north to get to the Scottish Hills, really. So.
I suspect at some point I'll move back up. But for now, it's the Lake District is becoming very much home. As well. I mean, I live in Kendal, and Kendal is kind of a nice place where you can enjoy the Lake District, but you can also get to the Yorkshire Dales, which are slightly more quiet in the summer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So tell us a bit about the running then. What's special about kind of running in the hills particularly, and what benefits do you get from it?
Yeah, I find that I think running and walking in the hills are not necessarily completely different from one another. I think there is, for me, it's all about moving in the mountains, which sounds quite groovy, but I think, whether you're taking them at a slow pace or a quicker pace, you're still there for the same reason, and that's to enjoy the landscape and see amazing things. For me, running in the hills is tapping into a different rhythm of the hills. I think there's a nice pace to it and a really liberating feeling about, being able to cross a further distance and see more, and link up routes that are a little bit harder to do if you're just walking. It can take up quite a significant chunk of time. So really the running in the hills unlocks the landscape to be explored a little bit more, I find.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why I enjoy it so much. And there's just a thrill to it. There's a thrill to running downhill fast, and a real joy in, kind of running up hills.
I was going to say, when I first started getting involved with the Highland Hill Runners up here, they took me out.
Aye.
They took me out, and one of the things I noticed was really going uphill. You are walking sometimes because there's no choice, but as soon as you get downhill, you're just going for it, aren't you? So.
Yeah. I think there's sometimes an accusation leveled that runners don't look at the landscape, and I think that's kind of unfounded. I think for me in particular, like, it's all about the landscape and the views and also just how it makes you feel. I think we all go into the mountains for different reasons, and if running is your way of doing that or walking, then crack on.
Yeah. And one question I've got here is, can anybody do it? I mean, how do people start doing this? I mean, for you and I, who are kind of used to doing this sort of thing, it's we know what it's about, but how would somebody get up there and run in the hills if they're not used to it?
Yeah, I think there's obviously a base level of running you do need to have, particularly on stuff that's not tarmac, so uneven ground. I would suggest that people should have the base level of fitness to be able to run 10 kilometers at least, on trails. That doesn't have to be fast, of course, but the more important thing is getting some time spent in the hills. I think that doesn't really matter whether that's walking or running. The hills are much different to your local riverside trail. The weather changes quicker, you have to prepare more, you get a bit of an instinct as to assessing your situation, and that's just something that comes with experience. And so in the book, there are a number of routes which are lower level trails, easy to follow, nice sort of smooth terrain that will certainly be excellent for anybody who just wants to get that feeling of adventure but not going over the hills. But for those who are wanting to take their adventures to slightly higher altitudes, I would definitely recommend getting a few hill days in, just to experience that and to know how to prepare properly, and having a good sort of like level of running fitness. I'm not going to prescribe people do hill reps or anything like that, but after spending a long time of walking in the hills, you can translate that quite easily into running in them too.
Yeah, it's quite often time on your feet, isn't it, rather than distance as well. So there's quite a lot of big routes in your book, the kind of impressive ones, and as well as a few kind of shorter ones, as you say, to kind of start people off a little bit. But some of those big days and even the kind of multi-day ones towards the back are some serious running involved there, isn't there?
Yeah. So I think the routes go from around 10 kilometers up to 29 kilometers is the longest, like, one-day route. And then the ones at the back of the book, the multi-day routes, are a good starting point for people to get an idea about the very varied landscape that Scotland has to offer in particular. There's a few in there. There's obviously the West Highland Way, which is an extremely popular route with trail runners. There's the Tranter, which is obviously an iconic 24-hour hiking round that has become quite a famous running round as well. And obviously attached to that is the bigger Ramsey round. And then one of the routes is a route in the Cairngorms that literally I just came up with and put a bit of a different spin on it that was linking up 5 bothies. And I think what I'd like to think people get out of the book is that the routes in them are 25 inspirational running routes in Scotland, that means that they're basically a springboard for you to be able to come up with your own adventures and start thinking into the space of, well, that was cool, I enjoyed sort of linking up those bothies or running this linear route, but what could I do? And so I hope that people take the book as a starting point for them to start, coming up with their own adventures, and exploring the country a little bit for themselves.
Yeah, it really is one of those kind of inspirational kind of books, isn't it? I mean, you've got great photographs in there that really kind of show the landscape and running through it impressively, and there's lots of kind of suggestions you've put in for alternatives, and at the end kind of other things that are just a hint of what you could start planning yourself. So.
Exactly, and I didn't want to be too prescriptive with that stuff, and I think I kind of left them very open-ended to sort of suggest you could go here, you could go there. I mean, I think at one point I had a route that had like 4 different variations off of it, and I had to cut it down to like 2, because it was just, the possibilities for variation are almost endless.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if I could kind of put you on the spot and ask you to pick a favourite route out of the book, could you do it?
I mean, it's funny because people ask that, and I think sometimes they expect me to go like, oh, but that's like trying to pick one of your children. But actually, I do have a clear favourite, and that's the South Glen Shiel Ridge. South Glen Shiel Ridge was the starting point for John Broxap's 24-hour Munro record back in the 80s, and for good reason as well. It's delightful rolling ridgeline that has 7 Munros on it, and in every single direction you have expansive views. Behind you, if you're running it from west to east, you'll have Knoydart and Skye, and just north you'll have Glen Affric and the rest of the Kintail Hills. And once you get the kind of initial few kilometres of steep ground out of the way, you then have, best part of nearly 18 kilometres rolling along these tops and getting really quite dramatic views across to the neighbouring Munros that are on the ridge. There's a particular segment towards the end, I think on the third to last Munro, sort of halfway, I guess that's halfway through, and you're on Malshin Jerrig, and you've got this incredible view over to Unacherchri, that I think is probably one of the absolute standout points of the route. It's phenomenal, and when I think as well, each of the routes has a sort of like a memory attached to it for me, and in particular that one was one of the earliest ones that I ran that ended up in the book, and we just had incredible weather for it. It was October, and it was just prime sunny clear air sort of day, and it was just it was a really memorable experience.
Excellent. And did you do all these kind of with the book in mind, or are these ones you've kind of done over years and kind of selected from?
So I started off with a base of routes that I knew were really class and that I had done previously. Benaglow in particular is one that I know a lot of my friends absolutely adore, and which I've ran previously and thought was just fantastic. And South Glen Shiel Ridge similarly, done before, knew it was going in. And then there was a bit of a process of, a process of elimination and selection that was, informed by, firstly, which routes are popular with hill runners in Scotland, and that you kind of glean through friends and also just discussing it with the community. And then second is it featured in a race? Pentland Skyline, for instance, is a good example of that. And lastly, does it have a place in kind of like Scottish hill running history? The South Glen Shiel Ridge, obviously John Broxap's round, the Tranter is a classic as well, and then a couple that are sort of a bit more obscure but have a place in Scottish hill running history.
Yeah, Yeah, I quite like some of the little touches in there as well. A little kind of quote from somebody who kind of knows the area well. Or
yeah, that was getting the voice of Scottish hill running in there was really important for me, and not just hill running, but the Scottish outdoor community as well. There's a couple of well-known names from Scottish hill running in there, like John Broxap himself, Finlay Wild, Ali Bevan, who I'm sure you know, and then there's also others who are maybe not runners, like Lucy Wallace, who's a mountain leader and member of the Arran Mountain Rescue Team, and Neil Reid, who's the Cairngorm Wanderer and knows the Cairngorms like the back of his hand. So it was, the reason I did that was, one, to give a level of sort of like a second opinion, someone to verify that the route is actually really class. And secondly, to show that each of the routes in there are special to someone and that we should treat them with respect. Post-lockdown, we had a lot of people going to visit these places for the first time who maybe hadn't explored them before, and we did see some issues with visitor management and some of the pressures that come with that. And so this was a chance for me to say, this route is enjoyed by this person who lives locally and goes there all the time. And the kind of subtle hint is, and let's keep it that way.
Yeah, it's something in our industry we've been doing lots of stories on, so we're kind of seeing a lot of that all over the place. And it does,
I can imagine.
Yeah, it does. Well, fingers crossed, it seems to be calming down, and there's a bit more infrastructure going in where it needs to be. But it's balancing these things, isn't it, to make sure it's not overdeveloped.
We adapt really quickly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can adapt quickly to these things, and I think I've seen more like shuttle buses being installed, and hopefully, it's not all about cars. It's we want to get people actually getting to these places sustainably.
Yeah. That's it. It's a difficult thing to do with some of these more remote places, isn't it? But certainly, likes of around Aviemore and places like that, there's possibilities there, aren't there? So,
yeah.
Well, thanks very much, Ross. The book Running Adventures Scotland is out as of yesterday, I think, isn't it? 5th of May it came out.
Yeah.
So. Yeah,
5th of May it was officially out. So I think there's still signed copies available from Vertebrate Publishing at adventurebooks.co.uk, I believe is the URL. And yeah, I hope that people see it as a great starting point for them to come up with their own adventures, because I think you can't capture everything in 25 routes. I think there's certainly more there for us to discover, and places that I think that are kind of like maybe untapped gems.
Thanks to my guest today, Ross Brannigan, author of Running Adventures Scotland. He's already done the plug, so I'll not bother adding another one. But that's all from Active Outdoors this time. Thanks for tuning in, as the old-fashioned phrase goes. And please share and subscribe and like and all those other things to share the word about Active Outdoors. Keep up with our adventures, as always, at hnmedia.co.uk/Active Outdoors. Thanks for listening.